Hello and welcome to FinTech Impact. I'm your host, Jason Pereira. Today on the show, we have a repeat guest. And I say repeat, I mean from the Wayback Machine. Cato Pastoll, CEO of Loop, was back on in episode 5 in April of 2018. So it's been a while and a few things have happened since. And I brought him on the show today to talk about how Loop has evolved, in particular, their new offering, which will be of particular interest to anyone who's trying to operate across borders. And with that, here's my interview with Cato. Cato, always a pleasure.
Thanks again for having me. Good to be back.
Anytime, my friend. So, Cato Pastoll of Loop, tell us about Loop.
Yeah, so Loop is essentially an online banking and payment platform. What we do is we help companies that are operating as a Canadian business get access to banking services in other markets. So let's say you're a Canadian e-commerce brand that's selling, some type of product. Maybe you're selling on Amazon, Shopify, Stripe, to businesses or to consumers in the US, and you're collecting US dollars as revenue. What we do is we help you get set up with local USD bank accounts and local USD cards so you can receive money in US dollars and make payments in US dollars as if you're a local company, but from here in Canada. So essentially what we're doing is we're helping simplify the process and operations of managing a business across borders.
Excellent. And which is, if anyone's ever tried to do that across borders, the funniest thing is, especially being in Canada, when we're like, oh, well, TD and RBC have and BMO have operations. I can just go to my local branch and open up a US bank account. And hard stop, no chance. All right. So you guys originally were primarily focused on lending. Now you're getting into international banking. Talk about what was the impetus for identifying the opportunity there or the struggle that was there?
Yeah, absolutely. So, funnily enough, you just mentioned going into a local bank branch, and I think that's a good segue into a bit of the story of what I heard back in March 2020, which was really what kind of started to drive us in this direction to support companies through this new platform that we've launched. So, beginnings of the pandemic, everything is shut down. Bank branches are still open because they're an essential service, but companies are starting to go online, operate businesses by selling their products and services online instead of, through traditional retail stores. And I'm speaking to companies at this point in time. So there's lots of, business owners and entrepreneurs that I've built relationships with. They're launching, their products and services down in the US. And they're like, oh, I actually need a US bank account in order to receive my money in US dollars. So they call their bank up or they go to the bank branch, here locally, and they say, okay, I need a USD bank account. Like, what do I do? And the person says to them, drive down to Buffalo in the US, and you're going to meet with somebody there and they'll help you get set up with a USD account. And obviously the irony here is that we're in the middle of a pandemic. You literally cannot drive to Buffalo because the border is closed at this point. And basically, other than that, they're not able to open up an account. They're just kind of stuck without being able to collect their money locally. And what that means for that company is they're actually losing as much as 5% in foreign exchange fees, because when the US basically transfers money back to Canada and your money gets converted from US to Canadian dollars, the bank does it at a super unfavorable exchange rate. So these companies basically end up receiving their money in Canadian dollars, even though they're getting paid in US. It comes cross border and they lose a whole bunch of money. And so I started hearing this story over and over again from business owners who were basically starting to do more and more business in the US and thought, hey, there has to be a better way for companies who are operating cross border to manage their business finances, other than having to drive down to Buffalo to open up an account, or have to incorporate and spend tens of thousands of dollars on the annual legal, accounting, and tax paperwork associated with having a US LLC. So that was kind of the origin as to kind of like some of the beginning stories that we heard when we started setting up Loop.
Yeah, and it's particularly grinding if you have sizable US expenditure as well, right? If you have any number of software vendors only accept US dollars. If you're buying materials and goods down there, it's particularly grinding to have to convert over your revenue to Canadian dollars, pay that exchange rate, only to have to convert back to pay the bill, right? And this is a form of natural, this form of very basic currency hedging 101 is you have a separate dollar account and you don't pay that exchange rate and you pay things in and out of that. And that makes a lot of sense. So you went looking for a solution and found that there wasn't one. No surprise. Talk to me about how you're solving for this problem.
Yeah. So what we do is we basically help companies get access to local banking in different markets. So for example, in the US, we will get you access through the Loop platform to a US account number, meaning you'll get a local US account number and a routing number, which is their equivalent of a transit number if you're familiar with the Canadian banking system. So you'll basically get local account details. So when someone pays you, let's say you're selling on Amazon and Amazon wants to make their payout to you, you give Amazon those account details and you can receive those money domestically in US dollars. So no FX conversion happening there. And so that's the first part of how we solve the problem. Then now you've got your money in US dollars, you need to be able to spend that money. So we have a couple of different ways you can do that. We have the ability for you to make domestic supplier payments through the ACH network, which is basically their local payment rail. So let's say you're a company and you need to pay, a vendor for supplies, you need to pay a shipping company, whatever it is, a logistic company or 3PL. You can use us to basically initiate that payment directly from our platform. So you can use your US dollars to pay your suppliers at no cost whatsoever. We also have a card product, which is a really cool card product. It's a MasterCard branded card product. And so what's unique about it, it's what's referred to or what's called a multi-currency card. And what a multi-currency card means is that normally with a card, let's say you use a Canadian bank credit card and you go and make an expense in US dollars, they will convert that expense into Canadian dollars and they'll add 3.5% to 5% as a foreign exchange markup. So let's just say Canadian dollars today are 1.25 to the US dollar. So when you use your card to spend in US dollars, the bank will actually charge you 1.29 instead of 1.25 on every dollar that you spend. With a multi-currency card, not only are there no fees, but there's actually no conversion either. So when you spend in US dollars using our card, your balance actually gets reflected in US dollars. When you spend in Canadian, it gets reflected in Canadian. When you spend in British pounds, it gets reflected in British pounds. So we actually give you the ability to act as if you're spending money domestically by spending, when you spend in that currency, that gets added to that actual currency balance. So that's why it's called a multi-currency card product. And obviously for companies that are operating cross-border, that's super valuable for the reason that you said before, which is you want to match your revenue and expenses to each other. You don't want to convert your revenue back into Canadian dollars and then convert Canadian dollars back into the other currency. If you're earning US dollars, why not just keep it in US dollars, both from a revenue and a spend perspective?
Yeah, there's few hustles more opaque than currency conversion. I'll say that much. Yeah. So, all right. So basically, you went about this. Now, how do you get around the challenge of basically someone not having to register down there? Is it just being registered? Like, so there's some sort of sub to your company, or how does this work?
So there are now banks in the U.S. that will open up accounts for non-US residents. The way that we basically do that is we are helping kind of facilitate all the KYC, KYB processes required to onboard that customer. So, we actually have quite a robust infrastructure that we built, having kind of run this business for the last 7 years. We've been able to kind of automate the account opening process in terms of customer verification, ID collection, all that type of stuff that's required to, verify a customer. So believe it or not, you can do this digitally and you can do it digitally effectively, contrary to what maybe some FIs might tell you. So what we've been able to do is prove you can do that through a digital process for Canadians, transfer that information over to our US bank partners. And so they are able to open up those accounts for Canadians, which in actual fact, many Canadian banks still can't do today, but US can do that. US banks can do that for Canadian companies.
So you said, contrary to what financial institutions will tell you today. Yes, no kidding. Yeah. No kidding. I mean, these people just learned what DocuSign was about 2 years ago. And I love the fact that we can it's easier to digitally set up a bank account in the States digitally than it is to set up a Canadian one in Canada. That is just, God, my brother fear. All right.
Do you need a minute here?
I might need a minute. I need a minute almost every week now. So that's the situation there. So you basically, bottom line is, you're just being held to their KYC AML standards, right? Whether you're there or not, doesn't matter. They just want to make sure these people are who they are and that they're not, some money laundering business. So it's same as, which makes sense. All you do is comply to their rules. So in a lot of ways, you're an outsourced branch of theirs and you meet all their criteria.
Exactly, right? And so from a customer perspective, they're able to get the benefit, though, of getting that local USD account, which right now is really challenging for them to get, right? Like you've either got to incorporate there, or you've got to be a super big business with, significant negotiating power to actually get the bank to do this for you. But the vast majority of companies here are just simply not able to access those domestic banking services. And so by doing this, what's most important is we save companies time and money. We save them time because we offer all of this in one platform that's really easy to use. We save them money because we give all of this away for free, actually. So we give them the ability to open up their USD accounts, get USD cards, and manage all their expenses through Loop without costing them a dollar. So we also have, additional benefits, things like, rewards and stuff like that for using our card product. So it's definitely an attractive proposition for companies.
Absolutely. Okay, so you've just gone, as of the recording of this, you've just gone live with this product, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
Early cases of testers thus far. What was the feedback?
Yeah. So, I mean, companies have really been loving the Loop product so far. We've actually had people like post about us recently on Twitter and social media accounts talking about how much money they're saving, like comparing how much money they're saving with Loop versus like their bank cards that they were using before. So, as I was mentioning before, with a typical card, banks will add a 3 to 5% markup. So, like for a business that's spending $100,000 on ads, which is not uncommon, especially with e-commerce businesses, that's $3,000 to $5,000 a month that they're losing in these foreign exchange charges, right? Just on the spend side. That's not even factoring in the foreign exchange charges on the receiving the money. So customers are delighted specifically about the fact that they're saving a huge amount of money on every dollar that they're spending in non-Canadian currency. So, that we've actually had seen people comparing how much money they're saving on a monthly basis by switching over to Loop from their current offering. So that's one thing that we've helped with. The other thing is we've also helped companies that were maybe apprehensive about going to the US because they were like, I don't want to deal with the paperwork of incorporating, dealing with taxes and accounting and all this stuff in terms of setting up a US business. And when they learned about the fact that we could help them manage their business in that jurisdiction without having to deal with all that paperwork and ongoing annual hassles and filings, that was a huge impetus for them to then go and expand their business cross-border. So, we're doing this right now. The main use case is for Canadian businesses expanding to the US, but our goal is really to help businesses anywhere who want to manage their business cross-border, manage their finances in multiple jurisdictions. So, Canadians operating in the UK businesses operating in the US. The goal is for Loop to really be a global banking platform.
Excellent. You just got to get things working the opposite way, where American companies can more easily set up to receive money here and be compliant. Because as a what it's like. We go to buy something, and it's like, oh, sorry, we don't ship to Canada. You're like, what did I spend 20 minutes for? But absolutely. So, okay. So great. I mean, frankly, it's a win-win across the board. You basically made it easier to deal with something that was a major pain in the butt before, allowing for potentially companies to expand into a jurisdiction without the burden of what was at least the perceived, if not actual burden of the administrative hassle of getting something like this going. And you're costing them less. So that's like the definition of fintech: better, faster, cheaper, right? So excellent.
Yeah, I mean, so not only are we costing them less, we've also really taken a lot of time to understand what the challenges are that our specific customer base faces. So for example, working capital is a big thing for, online businesses and e-commerce brands, because you're buying inventory now, you're waiting, 60 to 90 days for that inventory to arrive. The last couple of years, that's been more like 150 to 180 days for that inventory to arrive. And then only at that point are you then able to then market and then sell those goods. So there's a huge cash negative kind of working capital gap that companies have to deal with whenever they're operating in this kind of market. And so we really learned that. And so we've actually already been building product to support with that as well, to supplement kind of the kind of banking and card offering that we have. So for example, with our card, when you spend money on the card, you actually get 55 days of interest-free spending. So we basically offer that first 55 days of working capital that you have for zero cost to you as a merchant. So we basically give that to you as a benefit of using our card product. And in doing so, we help partially alleviate that working capital gap that companies have. We also have recently launched a couple of financing products. So we have like a PO financing product. So if companies are selling to larger retailers in the US, we understand that there's a working capital gap associated with, producing that order, getting the inventory manufactured, shipping it down to the US, and then getting paid. So we're also helping companies access the financing that they need to do those types of things. So instead of it being, our original model that we spoke about, back in 2018 was very much, focused on individual business financing for kind of growth or expansion purposes, we've gotten really niche down and are really focusing on a specific segment of the market, which is cross-border, and helping not just with their cross-border banking, but with all their cross-border financing needs too.
Interesting. I mean, and specifically around the working capital piece. I mean, first off, anything that reduces a company's need for working capital is a fantastic thing in my book. And for those of you who don't really quite comprehend it, my other podcast, Financial Planning for Canadian Business Owners, actually just finished a multi-part series on understanding your accounting. And one of those was an episode on working capital and optimization. So take a listen there for tips. And in addition to that, I mean, it's interesting. So 55 days. So this is something that's come up with other guests of the podcast. There's all kinds of businesses out there to do invoice financing for when essentially you sell something online. you need to buy the good, or you have a 30-day lead time before Amazon or Shopify pays you. I mean, if you're basically offering 55 days 55-day terms and lending, that's fantastic, because now you've basically taken out the need for that in a lot of cases, or at least to the extent to which you'll lend.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And there's many expensive financing options in the market right now to bridge that gap. And, not only are we saying it's not just we'll give it to you for low cost, we're actually giving it to you for no cost. So you can use our product and finance that working capital gap and save a ton of money. And, there are some personal products that do this, like there's some personal credit cards and stuff. Problem with those products is they are like usually really low limit. So unless you're just getting started out, the bank's only going to give you $10,000, $20,000 as a credit limit. But because we adjudicate and underwrite off of the business's data, so this is a business product, not a consumer product, it's not a personal product, it's tied to the business. So if you're doing, a lot of top line revenue, we're going to give you a limit that's reflective of that. And we're not going to say like, oh, your personal income is low, so we can't give you a decent sized credit limit, which is what a lot of typical personal credit cards do and that type of thing.
Yeah, it's, you built that system for the peer-to-peer lending already, right?
Yeah.
So, you're just deploying it in a different angle. It makes a lot of sense. And yeah, so if you're able to get those limits higher, I'm already thinking of people to send to you now. This is fantastic. No, that is incredibly useful, because they said, you said they're high cost. It's not unusual. Those types of invoice financing, loans are in double digits. And if you're rapidly growing, it's worth paying for. But if there's a free alternative, then yeah, it's something you should absolutely take up.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. At the end of the day, our goal is to very much solve the kind of day-to-day financial pain points that these companies are facing. And so that extends beyond just credit. It extends beyond just banking. At the end of the day, if we're going to build meaningful, lasting relationships with companies and want them to stick around and use our products for, not just a short period of time, but for the long term, we want to give value before we ask companies to give us value back, right? And so that's really our philosophy in terms of this product and how we're building things with Loop. Is we really want to demonstrate a lot of value to customers in this segment by giving them a lot of embedded value in our products from the get-go.
Well, it sounds like there is a lot from the get-go, and given the fact that you have a lot of history in the lending space, I can see that the knock-on products and everything else that you can offer puts you. It's interesting. You're not a challenger bank per se. You're like a cross-border challenger bank to some degree, but you've got the lending chops that other people didn't. So that's an interesting play.
Yeah, it's interesting. Just kind of big picture, taking a step back. There's a lot of people who help with like kind of cross-border payments from the perspective of like getting paid in different currencies. So, there's lots of like acquirers or merchant, processors who basically will help you collect money in different currencies, like by charging your customers in different currencies. But it kind of stops there. So it's like, okay, I've now billed someone in US dollars, but now what? Like, how do I actually collect those US dollars? Where do I put them? How do I make payments with that? So like it's kind of just assumed that the banking piece was solved, but the reality is that for most companies, it's not solved. There's no real way for them to manage their finances in other currencies. So we realized that this was a huge market opportunity for us. And that's definitely something that, we're going to continue to invest in, because there's lots and lots of companies who are doing business cross-border, and there's no reason they shouldn't be able to access the same or better quality of banking services in other markets as they do back home domestically.
No, absolutely. Well, there's reasons, just not good ones. Anyway, so which we'll talk about off here. So before we wrap up, this is something that wasn't around, I think, back in episode 6. Okay, so I asked 3 questions to wrap it up and get you, I think, on a positive note. First one is, if you had one wish for something you could change in your company, the industry as a whole, what would it be?
So the question is in our history as a whole, if there's one.
No, sorry, in your company or the industry as a whole.
Oh, in the industry as a whole. Good question. Yeah, I think ultimately businesses should be able to access lower cost capital to grow their company. I think there's way too much of a structural gap between the capital that small companies are able to access and large companies are able to access. And that's really driven by a market inefficiency more than a risk equation. I've been seeing that for many years as we've built this business. So, for me, if there's one thing that I wish for us to be able to change, it's that companies who, are building great businesses, but maybe just aren't big businesses, should still be able to access the same quality of services that larger companies are able to access. And that's really a lot of what our mission is about. Whether it's lending, whether it's cross-border services, make all of the same things that big companies get the benefit from available to smaller companies.
Have you seen what the minimum revenue numbers required for commercial banking are these days, my friend? Yeah, it's the needle's moving way off in the other direction, that's for sure. So unfortunately. So that's the first question. The second question has been, what's been the biggest challenge in getting the company to where it is today?
Yeah, I mean, navigating a pivot during a pandemic has to be the answer. Yeah, I mean, we had built a really solid business model based on back when we spoke first time I came on the podcast. And I think it was definitely a really challenging year, 2020, because we had built a great business. We had thousands of clients using our platform, happy businesses and happy investors. And unfortunately, the pandemic came around. Nobody could have controlled that. Obviously, that was a black swan event that occurred. But the outcome of that was definitely difficult to manage because there was so much uncertainty at the time as to what the government was going to do, how they might support small businesses, how they might support service providers like us, the small businesses, and the realization that we had to basically forge a new path forward and almost start from the beginning was not an easy one. So a lot of challenges in terms of doing that, making difficult decisions, guiding our team through that. Definitely the hardest thing I've ever had to do personally. But I think we've come out of it on the other side stronger than going in, and that's the best that we could have potentially hoped for. But it definitely was no easy journey that we've kind of shaped through over the last couple of years.
I hear you. It's not to make anyone tap out, but you came out stronger, so I can hope for. But one correction. Nicholas Nassim Taleb himself says it wasn't a black swan; it was a white swan. It's a known danger. So he gets very prickly about that. Anyway, so last question is, what keeps you getting up in the morning every day to keep on fighting the good fight? I mean, this has been quite the challenge since we first met, especially because again, the market shifted out from under you overnight with the pandemic. So what keeps you going?
Yeah, the impact that we make on businesses. Like when I hear things like businesses that started out with us with a few $1,000s in revenue and we helped them get access to more capital so they could grow tens of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars. It's super energizing. It's super exciting to see how much companies grow as a result of kind of what we're able to provide. I mean, there's stories. There's actually one of our first customers that we ever had, Lending Loop. So this was back in 2015, 7 years ago, was a guy selling knives on Amazon out of his basement. And I mean knives like kitchen knives, just to be clear, cooking utensils. And
what else was I going to assume? But anyway.
But interesting side hobby hustle. He needed capital for inventory. No one would give it to him. The bank laughed him out of the room. They were like, "Are you kidding me? You're looking for financing for your e-commerce knife business? Get out of here."
Because knives can't be sold online. Give me a break.
So we helped that company, and that company has come back many times. They're now a customer of our new Loop platform because they operate in multiple jurisdictions. We've given them millions of dollars worth of capital, and they've been able to grow to a $20 million plus a year business. So, I mean, seeing stories like that are so motivating to know how much that company, not to take any credit away from the founder of the business, obviously that they're 100% responsible for their own success, but the impact we were able to have by supporting them when nobody else would is obviously a really exciting thing that keeps me going every day. And when you hear stories like that, or you get the praise or the thanks from founders that we're able to support, there's nothing better than that.
No doubt. I mean, you're helping and giving them the lifeblood of their business. So I can see that. Absolutely. So Cato, thank you again. Great to have you on. Welcome back. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me again. Always get to check in and give the update. And yeah, who knows what will be another 4 years from now, right?
I'll bring you back every 4 years. How about that? All right. Excellent. All right. Thank you very much. So that was today's episode of FinTech Impact. Hope you enjoyed that. And if you're a small business looking for easier access to banking in the US and foreign exchange, then please check out Loop. As always, if you enjoyed this podcast, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, take care.
This podcast was brought to you by Woodgate Financial, an award-winning financial planning firm catering to high net worth individuals and their families. To learn more, go to woodgate.com. You can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, and Google Play, or find more episodes at jasonpereira.ca.